Good evening. My name is Helen Anthony, Chair of the Committee on Finance. I'm calling to order our regular meeting on Thursday, May 30th at 2024 at 5:34 p.m. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Chairwoman Anthony,
Present.
Vice Chairman Taylor, absent. Counselor Andujar, present. Councilwoman Graves,
Here.
Counselor Sanchez.
Here.
We have 4 present and 1 absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you so much. I'd like to recognize, we have from the City Solicitor's Office, Nick Poulos. We have our wonderful clerks, Tina Mastriani and Carissa Beloso. I hope that's correct. So thank you very much. And we have Miguel Yanes, who from our policy team. So, and I want to thank all our very distinguished guests for attending tonight. We look forward to hearing from you. So I think what makes sense is that we have you all stand and we'll swear you all in. Just in case you're all gonna present at some point. And everyone, please raise your right hand. You swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony that you're about to give is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Please state your names and titles for the record.
Superintendent Dr. Napoleon Benich. Zach Scott, the single.
Thank you.
And Scott, Director of National Affairs. Third phase, Chief. Salvador, the operating officer. Scott Sutherland, Chief of Staff.
J.G. Wedgemont, Public Information Officer.
Joe Jackson, Senior Advisor.
That everyone? Thank you. Okay, who would like to present to us? And certainly, you know, you can call your team up in any way you'd like to, and we'll make sure that we can see you and hear you. I think before we start, we will mark the exhibits that have been distributed. So we have the first exhibit is our Providence School FY25 budget presentation, and we'll be marking that as exhibit 28. Have a motion.
Second.
Okay, motion made by Councilor Andujar, seconded by Councilor Taylor. I mean,
Oh,
oh, we are going to mark the appropriation document as number 29. We have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Councilor Sanchez, seconded by Councilor Graves. We're going to have the compensation ordinance marked as 30. Have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Councilor Sanchez made a motion, seconded by Councilor Graves. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? I hope I said that on 30. Yeah, right. And then we are going to mark the last one, the classes and positions, as number 31. We have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Councilor Graves, seconded by Councilor Sanchez. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? With that, I think we've marked the exhibits. So please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, good evening, Chairwoman, and members of the City Council Finance Committee. I want to say thank you for providing myself and my team the opportunity to come before you this evening regarding our budget for the upcoming fiscal year. As we know that it's spring is normally a time for rebirth and optimism. However, tonight I feel the weight of some very difficult decisions that we have to make as a school community. I know that you too, as city council members, bear a similar burden. We are navigating a world with great demands and limited resources. But I am asking you that to please fully fund the Providence Public School District because it is the right thing to do, and it's the right thing for our students and our city. And after years of love and funding, we have the obligation to make some very deep cuts to the district. Please know that these decisions keep me up at night and threaten the progress that we have made so far. The school district does not have a printing press, and neither does the city. But we are looking at over 20,000 students. There are investments and that we will provide a positive return. So please, and I ask for us to invest in our students. This is why I'm asking for full funding. And together we can continue to rebuild the public school system that supports close to 20,000 students and the investment that will ensure our future. The city council believes in education. I know that. I know some of the members, when I look around the table, I look at some of the members who have graduated from Hope High School, Mount Pleasant, Classical High School, Century, who are leading our city. When we visit schools, we get to speak with the future council members, business leaders, and change makers. Tonight, I am once again appealing to you to please keep our momentum moving going forward. However, together, we have done some great things. We opened 3 new or like new schools, with a 4th one about to open, and many more in the pipeline. We have increased the number of students who are leveraging their CTE credentials to move into high-wage jobs right out of high school. We awarded over 232 seals of biliteracy to a class of 2023, and 6 different languages. These sealed by literacy were in French, Spanish, Italian, Japanese, Arabic, and Portuguese. We recognize 6 students with seals of triliteracy to demonstrate proficiency in 2 languages other than English, or in addition to English. Our Providence students have received awards in engineering, biomedical, and welding. In addition to this, an increase in numbers of PPSD students are earning college credits while still in high school. So in closing, I thank you, Chairwoman and members of the council, for your hard work on the city budget. Thank you for visiting our schools and serving as role models for our students so they can see what's possible in their lives. As I finish my 3rd year as your superintendent, I believe that our school districts their best days of our school districts are still ahead of us. We just have to continue to work towards that and give our students every opportunity to be successful. I know that with appropriate funding in the future, we will be sitting here celebrating a comeback story that is the national model for the public education. I know that your investment will be a successful story for thousands of our students. I look forward to celebrating these successes with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Once again, my name is Zach Scott. I'm the Deputy Superintendent of Operations. And what I'll go through is a presentation where we shared some of our ordinances in advance. What the presentation does is provide some additional context and summaries of the main points, but I certainly encourage members of the council to ask questions as we're going through this. And then we'll certainly leave time to answer any questions, both of the ordinances as well as the presentations in general. I also want to mention that our Executive Director of Finance, Chris Patisi, had an unforeseen passing in his family on Tuesday, and so he won't be able to join us. So I will be fielding most of the financial questions, and should there be anything I'm unable to answer, we'll certainly follow up afterwards.
Thank you.
So if we turn our attention to the presentation, how I'd like to guide our discussion is by talking through an executive summary, just to give what we see as some of the salient points for our budget for the upcoming year. After that, we'll talk and provide a brief budget overview of our key expenditures and our sources of revenue for those who are unfamiliar with the school department's budget. We'll also look at our FY25 budget planning process and how we came to the budget that we'll provide in greater detail in the last section. So as we turn to slide 3 and look at some of the headlines and summary as we face this upcoming fiscal year. The district is facing significant financial challenges as we look towards fiscal year 25, with 3 main factors driving those challenges. The first is expiring COVID relief funds while student need continues to grow in the district. We are also faced with declining enrollment that impacts our state aid and other resources that come into the district. Those 2 factors are what are fairly typical when we look across both Rhode Island and across the country. What is unique in Providence's case is historic underfunding that has led to financial challenges for the upcoming year. What that means is stagnant per pupil funding, and we'll explain more about the mechanics of how that plays out in the district. But that means we often need to make cuts just to keep pace with inflation. When we look at the proposed FY25 city budget, it translates to a roughly 3% increase in funding since the start of the state intervention, while the city budget has increased by 21% over that same period of time. Due to years of underfunding, Providence now spends less in absolute terms than Warwick, a district that serves half the student population of Providence public schools. With that context, we have been planning our FY25 budget for quite some time. And as you'll see on slide 4, our budget assumes $147 million in aid from the city of Providence, which is slightly less than what was requested in the prior fiscal year. That amount is $15 million less than the statutory obligation, but $14 million more than we know is in the current city's proposed budget. We just want to highlight that this funding is critical, and if additional funding PPSD does not receive additional funding, we will likely need to make additional cuts both in this coming year and beyond. To talk a little bit more, and we'll dive in greater detail in future slides, but we talked about growth in student needs. One area that is really translated to growth in costs based on those needs is out-of-district tuition, which we have seen both a rise in tuition costs to the tune of $10 million, as well as associated transportation costs. And we'll explain a little bit more about what is causing that and what we've done to address them. Despite these challenges, we have focused on sustaining investments that are critical for our students, and in many cases required under either a settlement agreement with the DOJ or other challenges facing the district. First is sustaining increases in translation and interpretation services that we offer to our families and students. This is important to making every school building and the district in general more accessible to all the families that we serve. We've also, while not able to retain all additional supports that we've added in the past few years, we are able to sustain several social emotional support staffing categories, including some of our increased social work, as well as our behavior interventionists. We also will sustain our tuition reimbursement for ESL certification for our teachers. That has allowed us to be, more than double the number of teachers with ESL certification in the district. To address both these investments, as well as the challenges that we've faced on rising student need, we've already had to make significant reductions for FY25. This includes nearly a 290 FTE reduction in staff, which is approximately 9% of all staff, and a 19% reduction in central office. We are focusing on improving transportation efficiency and allowing school bell times to spend less on transportation and more on classrooms. And we've also, as the superintendent noted earlier, had made some fairly difficult decisions related to school reconfiguration for both JSEC 360 and Gilbert Stewart. These reductions have resulted in staff member layoffs and non-renewals, all of which typically follow contractually or statutorily agreed upon processes for staff reductions. And as we'll share later, both have impacts at the district level, but also for individual schools. So it's a summary, then we'll talk about, I think, a lot of what we were shared in greater detail. But if we can turn now to the next section, which is the budget overview on slide 6. My goal here is to share a little bit about our budget in broad strokes, both in terms of expenditures as well as revenue, just to give some broader context before we go into greater detail. So what you'll see here is a brief overview of our FY24 budget, broken down between out-of-district expenses and in-district expenses. In out-of-district expenses, that includes tuition costs for special education and out-of-district placements, as well as charter reimbursement for students attending state schools, excuse me, as well as reimbursement for students attending other schools for CTE, career and technical education. But of the proportion that remains in the district, the vast majority goes directly to our schools, with nearly 88% supporting school-based costs. The small remainder is used to support central office and other centrally managed costs. We want to then dive in a little bit deeper into each of those areas. Excuse me. I'll direct to slide 7, where we look at our school-based costs. Like many districts, we are a people business, and so much of our spending, goes towards investing and, staffing at our schools. Roughly 85% of our spending at schools, 85% of our spending at schools goes to salaries and benefits. While with the next biggest cost being core operational services like custodial and transportation. These are typical of what you'll see in many districts, where staffing is the primary driver of expenditures. You look at slide 8. Now turning towards our centrally based, the central office portion of our budget. A portion that goes to district staff as well as benefits that are managed centrally, along with utilities and other services that are managed centrally. That makes up that roughly 12% remaining of the in-district budget. In broad strokes, that's kind of what we wanted to share in terms of our overall budget. But what we wanted to share a bit about next on the next few slides are where we've seen some significant growth in student needs, some successes we've seen with that, as well as some of the cost implications.
So I'm thinking that this may be a big point for us just to stop for a minute, just to catch up.
Sure.
Thank you for the presentation, and I wanted to recognize that we have Counselor Gonzalez. Thanks for noting. And also our chief of staff, Jim Rose. And policy, Mr. Gardner, so I appreciate that. So I just thought we would, just, if this is the appropriate time or the appropriate place, if anyone has questions, I can certainly kick us off with one of the questions I had from slide 3. And if you think it's more appropriate that I ask later on, you can tell me. So the underfunding on slide 3 that are significant. How did the ESSER funds affect the, where did you plug in the ESSER funds is my question. If you could give me an overall idea of, I imagine that, yes, I understand the argument about not investing as we should have possibly over the years. But how did you use the ESSER funds to plug the gaps and can you give us an idea of when?
Sure. So let me give you an overview of our ESSER funding because we've received several rounds of it over time, with the biggest round being the one that expired in September. So there was.
And just to stop you, ESSER funds, can you just define what they are for me?
Yes, it's the I'm actually going to say it so much, but I forget the acronym exactly. But it was the funding provided by the federal government, the elementary and secondary school relief funds that was provided to all districts across the country from the federal government to support with school reopening and learning acceleration efforts. The most recent round that expired in September is the largest. It's roughly $120 million. The rounds before were smaller portions that have all been expended by the district. So to share more, and my colleagues can chime in where I miss. A big chunk of the original kind of first few tranches of that were frankly just to get our schools open safely. And we are proud that we were able to do that while many other districts, particularly in the Northeast, remain closed. So that went towards additional cleaning, additional buses because we had to run at half capacity, additional nursing staff, masks, PPE, changes to our buildings, technology to make sure we could have students access that both in schools and so the kind of the big bulk of that early spending in the COVID relief funds were directed towards schools.
Back in districts and as well as just a quick reminder, we were probably the only district that actually stood open the entire time of COVID was stopped. So we was one of the first districts to actually go that way. And actually served every student that possible.
So our goal has always been then with the after you get past that kind of initial reopening was to spend 70% of that directly on learning acceleration. So beyond the basic needs of getting our schools reopened. So much of that was not to close to hire staff or to close budget gaps. 85% of that, or just 15% of that went to cover FTEs. The vast majority went to cover supplies, professional development, and other things. So let me give you a flavor of what some of those other expenses were. We, I think we're the only district in Rhode Island to extend our student day by 30 minutes. We know that student learning time is incredibly important, and that translates to roughly 15 more days of learning that our students have experienced this year, which we know is critical, to get students back on track. We also added additional professional development. Our current, or the prior teacher contract only provided for 1 day every year in teacher professional development. Something we heard time and time again in the Johns Hopkins report was, far less than we need to prepare our teachers for the first day of school. So we've added professional development both during the school year and before the start of the school, before and during the school year. This past year, we had a expanded summer school, so we typically offer credit recovery and some very limited summer offerings. This past year, we offered full day academic and enrichment programming for elementary students for anyone who would wanted to attend. So those were some of the major non-personnel costs, in addition to a lot of curriculum that we purchased to make sure all our schools have high quality curriculum. We have made some targeted investments in staff directly in our schools. Big categories of that were our social workers and behavior interventionists, as well as academic interventionists that will do small group pull out for math and reading. So we always knew sustainability of these positions was going to be a challenge, but we also knew our students needed that support right now. So we are in a mental health crisis. We are having students that are entering our school at all different levels of academic performance. And there's only so much you can do with curriculum and professional development to address that. So we did invest a small portion, roughly 15% of that ESSER funding in FTEs to support some of those positions that I mentioned. So I don't know if any of my colleagues want to.
I just want to add that we also, knowing that students are coming back from the pandemic, we want to make sure that they have the services that they need. That's why we make sure we added additional social workers, guidance counselors, behavior specialists. Those are all interventions we're going in to make sure that we try to make sure that the students receive the supports they need to help them try to pull that achieving gap, to make sure that they bring them back on par where they need to be, so we can continue to move forward.
And I would add just a couple of.
Yes, please.
Frank, we did add additional tutoring programming after school Saturdays during the break time, our April break and our February break. We had opportunities for students learning and acceleration, as well as expanding our summer program. Our summer school, we expanded to elementary, but we also had a full day. So the students were in there, then they had the opportunities to do academics as well as get lunch, breakfast, and dinner, which included transportation. So we were really investing in time for students to catch up, because nationally, we know students came back from COVID further behind, and we are already dealing with a significant achievement gap here in Providence anyway. So, you know, not any gains that we made were already, students were already going back, so you have to work twice as hard, which means you have to throw more at it right at the beginning to help kick it off, and then you can move on and stabilize.
Okay, just so I can understand, so, I mean, I have a follow-up question, so I totally understand where the money was spent, I think, but I just want to confirm, it was a 15% was spent of the first tranche of ESSER funds for the FTEs?
The last tranche of the biggest, 126 million, roughly 15% of that went towards salary range for FTEs.
And mostly for the social workers and academic intervention.
And behavior interventions, yes.
And behavior intervention.
The biggest groups.
And my follow-up question is, are the ESSER funds exhausted, or are you still using, if you still have ESSER funds available?
We have 85% of them spent or encumbered, and we are fully on track to spend them by the expired September 20, this coming September. So a big portion of that has been to fund professional development and our extended school day. We're doing a lot of professional development about the science of reading, and so when projected out, we are going to you will spend it all by the expiration date.
So my follow-up question is the, so the social workers, the academic interventionists, behavior interventionists, I hope that's a word, are they being let go because the ESSER funds are are no longer available. And I know, I'm just focused on that group in particular, because I know how important they were
Yeah,
to the COVID.
a portion, so that's where we had to make some tough decisions and cut deeper in other areas to retain some of those positions. So for behavior interventionists, we had 40 that were funded under COVID relief. We will be retaining 23. 23 for the coming year. Much of that is out of our Title I funding. But those will be sustaining 23. So that means 17 fewer behavior interventionists for next year.
And then how about the academic interventions?
That's a good question. We had roughly, I think, 25 or 30, and we'll be sustaining maybe 15 or 20. I can give you the exact number, but it's similar to about half of what we were.
And the social workers.
So since the beginning of the intervention, we've added 21, but I think we're non-renewing 6 or 7.
So we have about 74 that will continue with us, which is about an increase of 27 positions from the previous year. And just to give you a little context, from school year 2021, we only had, it was 51. So we've really made a significant increase in the amount of school social workers in the district. And happy to announce that that number will stay at 74 for the next few years.
Great. Councilwoman, we just stopped for a minute to ask any questions that you might have on everything up to the page 9.
Okay. I'm sorry to step out for a minute.
So I'm just gonna ask, does anyone else have some questions concerning these pages? Okay. Yeah, yes, Councilor.
Thank you so much, folks from PPSD for being here. My first question, I'm sorry that I missed it. What was the total allocation of ESSER funds? Was it 182 over the 3 rounds, or?
That sounds right. So the last one was 126. The second one, I think, was, I should look up the exact number, but in the 40s. And then the first round was the smallest, it was 15 or 16. So the 180 number you gave is about right.
My next question on this, did you guys have or process internally on how these funds were spent, or what kind of was like the dictating tool to determine how these funds were spent?
Yeah, I mean, I think one is we wanted to set pretty clear guardrails for ourselves to make sure that 80% of it, or so 70% was going towards academic and learning intervention. So while we had to spend a lot on just the basics that you need and things like that, it was really holding true to making sure we were directing as much of those funds as schools. So for SO3, we had a few town halls, I guess it would have been 2 years ago, where we shared some ideas, we gathered feedback from school leaders, but also parents and others that were attending, and then use that to help set the plan. And then, frankly, when you think of the early years of COVID, what we thought would be 2 years later often changed, and as we learned where our students were at and how they were progressing. So there were times we made amendments to it, even if we wanted just the kind of context or the needs of students to change.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Regarding the decision, I know it was with PTU to do the extended learning day. Do you guys have any data or anything that shows any benefits of that decision over the past year? We're middle of it, right?
Yeah, we're still in the middle of this. So, I think we'll see next year when our RICAS goes back, that'll certainly be one proof point.
I would say, we've also focused on other things at the same time. We kicked off our huge attendance campaign, so, one is we had the opportunity to have the extended time, but on top of that, we wanted to make sure all students were actually attending school so they could take advantage of that attendance. So, our attendance has improved dramatically. So hopefully the combination of the two will really show itself in our assessment scores this year.
Thank you. And on that point, what were the positions that were added that were, there was like a community specialist position added over the last few years. Are those being cut going forward, or what are those numbers looking like?
So the community specialists and budget coordinators were added, not through ESSER, but through by normal budgeting process in the, I think the first year after the intervention. Some schools in this challenging financial year that we're facing have had to cut those. So in many cases, a school would have to, have a difficult choice between an academic coach, their community specialist, and assistant principal, or other support staff, and oftentimes they weren't able to retain them all. So, I can look at the exact breakdown of how many of the community specialists, but it was a handful that were released from their schools.
But those were budgeting decisions that the school leaders made. So one school leader might have kept a community specialist and eliminated another position, and they could be opposite in another school.
So they have the autonomy to actually look at what was needed at those specific buildings. And say, you know, as a building leader, we always say, you know, which one would have a bigger impact on student learning and on student achievement. And they have their teams that, you know, they make the decision on who they will keep and who they will.
Well, that's good, and I think that's the first time that's been mentioned today that administrators at every single school have autonomy to voice their needs and concerns, and I guess what would be like the financial part of that on the districts and.
Yes, I can explain a little bit better. We moved towards a process of student-based budgeting where we give an allocation to schools, and schools can, within that allocation, make a lot more decisions than they used to. Prior to that, a lot of the staffing decisions were made centrally, which, while it allowed for, I guess, more uniformity, it often wasn't responsive to the needs of individual school communities. We base those allocations based on the number of students and the needs of those students at each school, and then principals were able to make decisions. I will say it was a very challenging year for our principals. You know, it wasn't a year where they had $100 that they got to add a bunch of stuff. It was, you have to reduce, and they had choice in that, which was good, but it was, you know, it was a very difficult year for them, and we're, you know, so appreciative of their leadership at their schools, because it often meant choosing between two things that they really need. But they, you know, had to make what they knew the school communities needed most.
Absolutely. My last question on this first part, regarding the reduction in central office, so that's from this current fiscal year to next current fiscal year, right? Sure. Has that specific part of the budget, you have like a rough estimate on the percentage that has grown since the beginning of the state intervention?
So we, as a central office, are down, I think, by like 5% since the start of the intervention. And overall, we're down a little, I think, I'll give the exact number, but we're down in total FTEs prior to since the start of the intervention. So I think we're down in total 340 FTEs across the district. 340 FTEs.
And that's since the intervention?
Yeah, since FY20, the change in FY20 to FY20.
Okay. Okay, yes, Councilor Ingersoll.
Thank you so much, for being here. I have a few questions I think are relevant to these slides. Let me know if I should ask them later, though, we can get to that. The first is on page 6. We see the 59 million for out of district costs. Are we going to get a breakdown of what that is?
Yes, so the main drivers, and we can give you the exact breakdown, but it is when you look in our ordinance, it's the out of district. There's a tuition line, which represents our tuition to for special education placements. There's a tuition to charter schools, which is a portion of that line. And then the third is the tuition to other school districts, and that is for our state schools like the Met and Gates. So those taken together with transportation, I believe, for our out of district transportation is what encompasses that 59. So if you look on those, the appropriation, it's the tuition lines plus a portion of the transportation line.
Do you know offhand what percentage of that is us giving money to charter schools?
Yeah, so in FY24, the amount was 32 million.
32 million.
Yes, please.
On slide 4, says the budget assumes 147 million from the city, 14 million more than the city's initial budget.
So what, are you gonna, is there a breakdown for what further cuts you would make if the city doesn't give you $14 additional million?
Yeah, we have something that we're planning to address it.
Okay, that's gonna be addressed. Because this, the budget we're giving out, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, assumes that, in addition to the additional 3 million that the mayor's proposed, this would be an additional 14 on top of that is what this budget is. Okay. But you'll get into that at the end. Well, the addition. And then, sorry. Yeah, no. Are you also going to get into a breakdown of which staff have been cut? Like, are we gonna see that later? I haven't put the reference.
Yeah, so we, in the presentation, we'll summarize it by level, we'll give you some roll-ups of categories, so like social, emotional, support staff in the total, and then in the classification ordinance, you can see by school, the FTE changes.
Okay. I think that's it for right now, but I had a lot. Yeah. Maybe, yes. No, so great. She took my question. Oh, I have, sorry.
I think that's why. With these schools closing, and this part is something else too. What say, because if the school is closed and they're getting housed in a school that's already open, that would have been open, what savings do you think we're gonna get out of that, and how you are applying that to this?
Just make sure everybody, what savings are we seeing from closing these schools? Or,
Yes.
Yeah, so for the J-Sec and 360 reconfiguration, it was, I believe, 1.5 million across multiple funding sources, so our local budget as well as our title budget. Gilbert Stewart was a bit in the room. I can pull up the exact number. We estimated on a similar, just on a local budget, salaries around 1.5 million. It's a little bit hard because while we closed Gilbert Stewart, students were added, students will be going to other schools, and so we added staff to those schools, but the net change we added around 1.5 million.
Okay. So the ones that, because I know Harry Kazarian is person. So,
Harry Kazarian is not closing, just, I want to make sure, so Harry Kazarian is under renovation, they'll be moving.
but that's what I'm saying, that building's not gonna be used.
Oh, right, yes.
That's good, that means that there's no need for any of these. Electricity or anything like that, right?
That's correct.
So are you estimating for these schools that have closed, are closing for even for a brief period of time, what the savings would be?
Yes, so that is included when you see both our custodial line and our utilities line includes any changes in our footprint. So when we look towards next year, we'll be, Gilbert Stewart will be going offline. Pleasant View will be coming back online as students move back to Narducci. Mary Fogarty will be going offline, while those students are temporarily housed at the old Spaziano Laurel Lab. So in some cases, we've got a school going offline with another school coming back online, but we factor that into our custodial costs because our new custodial contract allows us to reduce costs as we on a per square foot basis in addition to utilities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, and thank you for joining us, Councilor Peterson. Do you have any questions?
I do. So, let's see, where do I begin? You had mentioned that, and thank you for being here. I'm sorry, I was a few minutes late. You had mentioned that you went live with more summer programming. One of the things that I found last year is that there wasn't anything in the northern part of the city, and I had constituents reaching out. I wanted to know where that summer programming would be in my particular area or near my particular area.
So for this summer, we are not going to be able to offer that same level of expanded summer school.
So, but I thought you just mentioned that you had expanded on your summer.
We
For
experienced
last summer,
last summer, but we also provided transportation because it wasn't every.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. You had mentioned that you had more, I believe, academic support specialists on board than ever before. Can you tell me a little bit about where they've been? Are they placed mostly in the high school, middle school, kind of evenly divided? How does that work?
Yeah, so I can start with my colleagues and bring it, but the interventionists were largely at the elementary level, so they were able to do. In some schools, they would have either a math or reading, or for schools with a significant need, they might have both. And what you can imagine is there'd be a classroom where those individuals who are certified and experts in those content areas could pull out small groups to do math and ACA and literacy intervention. So that those, you know, what I think is always true, but particularly true post-pandemic, are we have a lot of students that are just coming in at a wide range of needs, and so we felt that those supports were necessary to really provide that beyond the kind of whole class instruction.
Our behavior interventionists, we had one at every school, so elementary, middle, and high. And for social workers, pretty much at every school, we almost had about 2 at every school, some possibly 3.
And just to be clear, interventionists were different than coaches. We also have coaches.
And because of the cutbacks that we've had to do, are they, some of them retaining their positions or all?
Some of them are retaining. So for our behavior interventions, we actually have changed the position a little bit. We are now calling them the registered behavior technicians, which they all were asked to receive certification, which we use some of our extra dollars to really train them into that, because that is a really hard to fill area. Not too many people have that certification or that training. That was one. And so, yes, the majority of the ones that we have hired into that new role were in the position this year. As far as the school social workers, for the most part, we've had some people that have, resigned, who, have just said the school setting is just not for them and have decided to move on. But for the most part, they would be also staying on,
Okay, thank you.
with the exception of those non-renewed, but it was a very small number.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I appreciate that. In terms of your student-based budgeting, I understand how you're how you're budgeting for each school. And I'm sure all the schools probably appreciate that to some extent, being able to determine based on that. My question is around what you've seen in your purview. My assumption is that the cost per student has increasingly gone up. And what I'm trying to determine is what are some of the things that are causing that dollar amount to continue going up? So would you be able to kind of break down a little bit?
Yeah, and we can share a little bit more in detail, but I would say some of that has to do with rising student needs. So when we think of all our multilingual population 8 or 9 years ago was roughly 10% of our student body, is nearly 40% now. It's a tremendous asset for the district, and one that we've invested in and seen a lot of great results. But that often, comes with additional costs. I would say we've also seen the other subpopulation have grown, special education and pre-kindergarten. Those are often classes that have a lot of staff and are relatively small. So on a per student basis, they cost a lot more to run. And we want to serve all students, and as the district and the LEA and the city, we are required to serve all students. So for any pre-kindergarten student, even before they step foot in our building, we are screening all 3 and 4-year-olds in the city with no kind of associated revenue for that support. So we've just seen those have been 2 areas of acute growth in student need that come with real costs to the district that we are obligated to maintain.
It also it requires a different, you can't have just one teacher and the students in the classroom. We require sometimes a co-teacher plus a teacher assistant, individual aid in some classrooms. So you can see that the staffing might grow, even though the number of students could be 15. There could be 2, 3, 5 staff members in that classroom based on the students' needs. So, that's where you have that gap in what students might generate in their funding formula compared to what we actually have to staff the classroom.
In addition to that, that also brings like extra support staff. So for example, speech pathologists, school psychologists, OTs, PTs. That is one of the areas. I think there's roughly around 7,000 3- and 4-year-olds in the city. We've seen really high need, especially after COVID. And a lot of them didn't receive early intervention. And so we're still reeling from that also. And we're seeing a lot of students that are coming in with very high needs with already having diagnoses of autism and some, really significant needs. And so that has been, something very challenging too.
It's almost like we get a student, let's say a student, comes in and we get X amount of money for that particular student. But to service that student, it goes 3 times.
Last question.
Yes.
If you could remind me what the cost per student is.
Yeah, so we looked at our specific, like some of our special education pre-K classrooms. While we received between 10 and 15,000 per student in state aid, the cost is roughly 30,000 per student when you take teacher, probably 2 teacher assistants in a classroom, and they with transportation, some of the support staff that's saying, Stuart mentioned, it does, those pre-kindergarten classrooms in particular are a lot more expensive than the state aid that those students bring with them.
And on average, the high school, like a student that's in high school would be somewhat less.
Yeah, I mean, you'll think at a high school or a student not in a substantially separate classroom, there'll be more students and which with that student teacher ratio is often with driving. So we get the exact breakdown, but it's a lot closer when you're talking at those non-specialized classrooms.
We significantly added also a lot of pre-K classrooms. To give you an idea, from 2021, I think we had 506 seats, which was like around 27 classrooms to now. For the upcoming school year, I'm happy to announce that we'll have 963 seats, which is about 40 classrooms that will be opening up in our district, which is great, which is our highest number we've had for a number of years.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'm gonna recognize Councilor Gonsalves in just a minute. I just thought this might be a good point to ask you. How do you count your students? I mean, how do you count your students? Is it a certain time? I know, how do you count them?
Yeah, so there's typically for funding purposes, there's the first poll of student data that happens in October 1. And then there's a subsequent poll later in March. And what the state uses is a number, they call it the average daily membership. And you can think of that as for a student that is there half a year, it counts essentially as half a student. So it's called ADM. So the first look at it is in October, and then the final enrollment number that they're using for the following year happens in March. The only other part I mentioned is for state aid, they use a proportion of students that qualify for free and reduced lunch to as a multiplier on top of the kind of base student aid you get.
Okay, and I think that you have in the documents you produced earlier that from October 23 to March 24, there were an additional 740 students. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, so we had
How would that, yeah, how does that, in terms of that kind of increase in that, I mean, I'm just interested.
Yeah, I mean, we typically see a growth in students over the course of the year. I will say this year we saw far more than we normally have seen, particularly at our early ages. So kindergarten, I'll look at the exact numbers, but typically between October 1 and the spring, we lose about as many as we gain. This year we were up 200 or 300 students. So we had to add at the kindergarten level. So we always know we fill over the course of the year. So oftentimes when we go to our classrooms at the start, they're not full, but they do fill over the course of the year. We've also had a number of students that come in that are now placed out of newcomer, but also out of district. So the out of district expenses that we mentioned are part of that. Students who come in can't be serviced because of the specialized needs that they have, and then are placed out of district.
Placed in or out?
Out.
Okay. All right, yes, please.
What's a typical number for change over the course of the year? The 7 plus seemed like a pretty high change.
Yeah, let me see if I can, I think the number I have in mind is like 300 or 400, or several hundred. But we did have to add 4 classrooms after the start of the year in kindergarten, because of the unexpected, like we saw there.
Do we know what happened with the kindergartens? Like, that's a lot of kids.
Yeah, I think we saw 2 things. One is there was, I can't remember which charter school, but there was a charter school that had slated to open, and so we had projected to not have as many kindergartners come in, and then that did not open. So we were excited to serve those students. And then we've seen a lot more students coming from out of state. And I don't know, I mean, I think part of this frankly is getting back to over the past few years. We usually as a district see a lot of students come from out of country and out of state during the course of the year. That slowed down dramatically over the past few years during the pandemic. And so perhaps it's either there's some like it's catching up or getting back to where it was before, where we're just having a lot more students migrate in than we had before.
To be clear, I'm really glad this, it was shocking.
We are.
Right, Counselor Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for all that you do for Providence Public Schools. For the guidance counselor line item, is that broad? So that includes behavior and interventionists, social workers, folks who have those degrees and certifications. Is that in that bucket, or am I misplacing that?
No, that would be, that I think is strictly our guidance counselors, both at our elementary and middle and high school levels.
Got it. So where's the line item for, let's say, social workers or behavior interventionists? Is that, is that in there?
Yeah, so behavior interventionists wouldn't be in here because they were funded out of our ESSER budget.
Okay, that was, okay.
It's a good question about social workers. They might be included either with the special education teachers or the general education teachers as a, because they are members of the Providence Teachers Union, but we can pull out the exact, it just isn't called out.
Got it. And so with the lack of funds that are going to be able to retain those positions, there's clearly some consolidation here. So what does the district intend to do to meet the social emotional needs of those students? Are those interventionists floating to different buildings, or how does that work?
Yeah, I'll start and say you can jump in is every school will still have social work support. They will just have less than they had this past year. With behavior interventionists, so they are often split across all the schools. Our behavior interventionists will, we think, make more sense to prioritize individual schools. So the special education team went through with principals and tried to identify our highest need schools, and that's where they prioritize which one to do that.
Got it. And then with regards to busing, I'm just curious about this. What's the total line item on busing kids across the district?
Yeah, so the transportation line in our appropriation for 20, the current fiscal year is 19 million. But let me share a little bit because that includes both transportation within the district, which is 13 million, athletics, which is a small portion, a little less than $1 million. RIPTA, so the passes that we provide to our high school students is a little over 3 million. Statewide transportation, that's for out of district transportation, around 4. And then some small field trips.
And I'm assuming that there has been needs assessments on maybe neighborhood schooling, because I know there are a lot of kids that are shipped essentially out of where they live. So their zip code to a various school across the city. Is that something that you all have looked at in terms of consolidation or reducing some of those costs?
We've looked at it. So we have taken steps to address transportation costs for this coming year. Some of that has to do with our bell times. So the way our buses service typically 2 schools in the morning, 2 schools in the afternoon. And so you have to align your bell times appropriately, because if we have too many early schools or too many late schools, we have to have too many buses. So we've taken steps. We changed the bell times for VZ and Pleasant View to better align it to address some of the transportation costs. We have had discussions about neighborhood schools, and I think all fair, it's a challenging one, in that I think by default everyone would want to have neighborhood students attending neighborhood schools, but also wanting to make sure students have choice, and if they wanted to choose something else outside of their district, outside of their neighborhood. It is part of the reason we are trying to move as part of our construction project for the pre-K schools, so students can stay in their, if they go to an elementary school in their neighborhood, they aren't then having to shift to a middle school, so they might be able to stay in their school community, and if it's neighborhood school for a longer period of time.
Thank you, Chair.
Sure. Where's the transportation line?
Yeah, it's under if you look on the appropriation lines, it is 9, like 2/3 of the way down on the first page.
Okay,
which is 55111.
thank you. Oh, got it, all right, I'm looking right at it, thank you. Okay. Any other questions, because we're gonna go, yeah. Go ahead, Counselor Santa.
Gentlemen, what's Riot's process in this budget? Or what's Riot's role, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think we all, as, with our, kind of from the bottom up with our school leaders, with our department heads, work to build a budget within, the school department. Presented to the superintendent. We are in consultation with RIDE, but under the state intervention, she's ultimately the approver and final authority for the budget. So, they are, you know, like any kind of supervisory relationship of giving us feedback as we're going through the process, but they're the ultimate after we make our recommendations and the superintendent makes his decision. RIDE is the ultimate kind of approver of all the budget.
My last question, regarding FTEs. To my understanding, there was classrooms this current year without like full-time teachers in those roles. How is that gonna be impacted going forward if we're reducing the number of FTEs?
Yeah, obviously a challenge, and what we've seen, and I'll do my best to explain it, is that there are areas where we have frankly, an abundance of more staff, and why we're doing some of the non-renewals that we are in areas like physical education and social studies where we have, there are more people than we have positions. While at the same time, in areas, high areas like special education, math, are areas where we are still actively recruiting and starting to find teachers. So as we reduce FTEs, the hope is that that will mean there are less positions open, but it is a challenge that you know, if we are reducing social studies positions, not the individuals can then go and fill a math position. So I think we have a chief talent officer here. I think we're ahead of where we were at this time last year in terms of vacancy for next year, but it'll still be a fight to make sure we're filling out high need areas.
So just one last question, just to provide an example, if a classroom does, or a school doesn't have a ninth grade math teacher for ninth grade class, like what happens?
So there's a number of ways we try to prioritize the needs of those students. So one is teachers can teach an extra period, and so we can have another certified teacher in the building teach what they call a sixth period, which is you know, the downside is it's a less of a planning period for the teacher, but it means that the students having a certified staff member in front of them. We also have retirees who are certified staff who work in many of our schools. And there's been relief in allowing them to work more days, so they might be serving this coverage. Beyond that, we would have a substitute teacher or another staff member in the building to cover that. So there weren't any times where our classroom was uncovered, but we would try to prioritize first with certified staff and then with the databases.
Just the last question. Regarding substitutes, is there any financial change in regarding the budget from this year to next year?
So we during the pandemic, we increased the rate of pay for substitutes because it was a real challenge for other districts to find those staff members. What we've learned is that in the kind of talent crisis that we're in, substitutes and teacher assistants are really strong pipelines to become full-time teachers, and so we are remaining keeping that rate of pay the same as it was during the pandemic. We aren't lowering. Just because it's critical to maintain staff in our schools, but it also serves a tremendous pipeline to teach full-time teachers.
Where could we find like the overall budget for substitute teachers in the budget?
Yeah, so if you look at line, the second line on the salaries, it says substitute teachers. That, and this is where I would lean on our finance director. I think that includes both per diem substitutes, as well as some of the coverage pay that I mentioned for some of this covering class. But that's the budget that we have for substitutes.
Thank you.
Yes.
This is a really quick follow-up. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Of course.
So with regards to very experienced teachers, I'm sure there are many who are highly qualified, but they probably overstay their welcome. Are there folks who, so what does that look like for teachers that had 25, maybe 30 years of experience? but haven't maybe pulled their retirement trigger or their retirement incentives, because I'm sure that eats up a lot of the budget.
Yeah, so I don't think this is unique to Providence, but we're probably on the higher end of this, is that. I think it's the numbers like 80% of our teachers are on the top salary set, meaning they've been there for 10 or 15 years or more. With some of the pension changes that's, I think, contributed to that, but it was, I think, fairly true prior to that as well. We've talked about retirement incentives. The challenge is, the biggest benefit to someone when retiring is the amount they receive, and that's not something you could provide as a one-time cost. It would be a significant cost the district would have paid for someone who wanted to get from the 40% to the 50%. So we've offered retirement incentives for some of our other unionized staff, but not for our teachers, because the cost of new things would likely be prohibitive.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for answering. Very good job. I guess we're picking up with page.
You actually covered some of this, so I might go a little bit more quickly. So this was to talk about how we're looking broad strokes at a budget where we need significant growth in student needs. As we mentioned, a lot of that has been to support our multilingual learners. Both because prior to the state intervention, the district was placed under a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice for failure to adequately support the needs of our multilingual learners. Since that time, we've seen the needs, the student body grow from a little over 20% multilingual students identified as multilingual learners to roughly 40%. And in absolute terms, it's far higher than many of our neighboring municipalities and other districts in the region. So we're at about 38%, Worcester's at 30%, Boston 32%, Bridgeport 26%, Hartford 24%, New York 13%. And again, a tremendous asset for the district. 40% of our students speaking multiple languages. It does require significant investment to harness that and to make sure we're adequately supporting them. So we made, and Ms. Stewart and her team have led the charge here in investments in coaching, curriculum, and certification, which have yielded strong outcomes. So when we look at students who recently actually MLL status, so say we can say this more eloquently than me, but these are students who have been with us, who are multilingual learners, who have been with us long enough to exit that status, outperform the general education students, meaning that they are performing higher on the ICAS ELA and MAP than students who had never been identified as a multilingual learner. We've also more than doubled the number of teachers with ESL certification. This was a key part of the Department of Justice settlement agreement. We've done that in partnership with the Providence teachers unions and through significant tuition reimbursement. But that means when we right around the intervention, we started what they called sheltered classrooms, which were classrooms that were just multilingual learners. Bad for a number of reasons, the student experience. And so by investing and providing and allowing teachers to get certification out, all of our kind of classrooms at the elementary level in particular are able to have both regular education students and multilingual learner students for an integrated learning experience.
May I just ask a quick question on the DOJ settlement statement? So the settlement agreement, are we finished, or is this a continual agreement, or it's impressive what's been done? I'm just wondering, are we done, or?
So we're really excited about all of the great things that we've been able to accomplish. As of right now, we are still in the agreement. And we have continued to meet with the DOJ. They have been a little less involved in the district with us this particular school year, but we do still meet with them. They do still, come for a visit. But for right now, we have not been released.
And let me ask this, what are the conditions?
So part of what Zach has actually shared, had all of the things that we have, had to do, like, for example, we've had to ensure that all of our students received ELD, which is English language development instruction. It's also making sure that we have, the proper certified, teachers, which again, we're really proud of having those integrated classrooms. Also part of that has been the interpretation and translation, that we want to provide to our families, providing that, which we do now also have. Also a lot of what we call our shelter content instruction training, that we provide to the teachers who are not certified. And so we continue to do that. So we have met all of those, obligations, which we're really excited about. And so we hope that, we'll be able to be released from that agreement, but as of right now, we still are in that agreement.
Thank you.
And we still have to continue. I want to also say that even though if we were to be released, we still have to continue all of this, because this is great practices and great work for kids, as you can tell by our scores, which I'm so proud of. I'm proud of all of our students, but really particularly proud of our MLL students.
Counselor Ingersoll, thank you. Can I ask a question about the percentage of MLL students, which thank you for all the work you're doing to support them. Is this just students in PPSD schools, or is the denominator also include kids in charter schools? And is the,
This is just Providence Public.
okay,
But it would include our students who are in our out of district, who possibly could be a duly identified student where they are an MLL student and also receive specialized instruction.
okay,
So it would include those also.
okay, thank you. Yes, my concern is this might reflect that the charter schools don't offer MLL in a lot of cases, or the denominator changing because we're shipping out kids who don't need MLL, so our percentage goes up.
We are responsible for times two. They are included in our agreement, just so you are aware, they are included in that.
Thank you.
In times two is a charter.
In district.
In district charter, yes.
Charter.
Yes.
Okay. Counselor Graves, did you have a question? It was asked.
Yeah.
All right, please proceed.
The next slide just touches a little bit more, and then we turn to some of our revenue that comes with the district, but this is focusing on different level students, both in general as well as focusing in on treatment and learning. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the growth, roughly 23% in out-of-district placements since school year 2019-20, which comes with significant financial impact. On the right-hand side was a little bit of what we talked about before, related to pre-K, and I want to highlight two things here. So the first you'll see depicted in the chart, which is the state aid per student and the cost to service to support those students, which is roughly 3 times. So that's one significant cost driver in the district over the past few years, as we are obligated to expand into kindergarten. That does incur, while there's some additional aid for more students, there are more additional costs. The other is the screening component, which I think is something that is unique to districts like large urban districts that are required to screen hundreds and thousands of students in grades 3 and 4. They may or may not enroll in the district. So we have at least four teams of 4 or 5 speech language pathologists, psychologists, social workers who are doing the screening. But as we have to add those, as more kids are screened, essentially a $4 million unfunded mandate that we are required to do with no kind of revenue coming in to support this. So as these costs grow up, it gives less discretion for things that we can change or invest on areas because we think we are obligated to. And, the district had not always been adequately supporting pre-kindergarten students for quite some time. And
This has been a significant challenge for us over the years. I've been in PPSD for over 25 years, and this has always been a challenge. And prior to, we have another settlement agreement in this area. There are 2 really big challenges with pre-K. One is the amount of students that, we're screening, but then also who have to be evaluated. And so that has really been increasing over the years. And then the second was, as we're evaluating and we're identifying more students, we're qualifying more for an IEP, they also require a classroom fee. And so that's another area where we traditionally had struggled, but really happy, as I announced earlier, that we've really grown 2 ways. We've grown those evaluation fees, and we still continue. We still need to add more to keep up with the demand. And then also the additional classrooms that we are opening to support our students who, we do qualify and whose parents, we do have some families who choose, like, I don't want to do this right now, wait, maybe do another year, or if they're getting close to be going to kindergarten. But, we do have an obligation, to, offer a classroom, so we've seen high numbers of those.
And just to be clear, you know, we receive funding for students once they enroll in the district. All of this work is prior to them enrolling in the district. So we don't receive funding at that point.
Okay. Did you have a? Counselor Sanchez.
Can you just, I know you touched on it a little bit, can you just explain exactly what screening means? So what screening? Yeah, like in your.
Sure, so there are two parts, so there's the screening, so that sometimes, that we have a team of about 6 screeners in the district. They go out into the community, so, you know, they can go to, say, the libraries, or we have sites where we will offer at our schools, where we'll do initial screening to see if there really is some kind of concern or possible delay in a student. Sometimes they'll be, also, sent to us by like a pediatrician, or, you know, after early intervention ends, we pick the child up at age 3, they may have already had early intervention prior, so that's screening. Then what we do is after a student, if they pass the screening, it stops there, but we're seeing very high numbers of students that are not passing, unfortunately, the screening, and that could be for a number of reasons. It could be speech, which is a high number of our students. We're having a lot more students with speech needs, a lot of more nonverbal students that we're seeing. So if they fail the screening for whatever reason, it could be a social emotional, could be, you know, some kind of a delay. What happens is then we do a referral for an evaluation. So we have a referral meeting where it's a team that comes together of special ed team that will come together and review the screening, listen to the family, and then determine if any evaluations have to be done on that student. And then if they do, then the team conducts evaluations. Then we come back and meet on those evaluations to determine if that student is eligible for an IEP. And then obviously we would create the IEP. Sometimes students just get speech, and sometimes students get, you know, a placement. We also do service students out in the community. It's called our community itinerant model. So we do also provide staff that will go out, whether it's a special educator or it's speech, sometimes it's both, to the community to provide services for our students.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Oh, okay,
No,
yes,
please.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How many students have IEPs in the district?
That is a question of all questions, don't you?
I can tell you that it is growing. And I can tell you that the majority of our students that come through pre-K, through the evaluations, do actually get an IEP. I want to say, please don't tell me, I'll send you that, but I believe it's close to 80% of our students that are for pre-K. I'm talking
For pre-K.
pre-K.
And then on an annual basis, how many kids are being referred to a neuropsych evaluation or?
I'm gonna send you that too, so don't hold me to this number, but right now, I think we have roughly 600-700 students that were referred to this school year. Plus, we had students that we still had from the previous year that we were still catching up with. So we have quite a few students, and I will definitely send you the numbers because I want to make sure that I'm giving you the correct.
And those costs are incurred by, is it the parent's insurance or is the school district?
I don't think any of that goes through the parent insurance.
For neuropsych evaluation that you're referring out to?
Unless the parent chooses that they're doing that, and sometimes they come with that evaluation to us, but for the most part, if we are recommending it, we are the ones that are responsible for paying that.
Thank you.
Yes, Counselor Graves.
Going off of what you're saying, are you working with any of the health centers or anything with these screenings and stuff like that? Because I know quite a few of the students do go through the Providence Community Health Center.
Sure, sometimes they send us, you know, students they refer. I wish that we could do some more community outreach. But, as you can see, our budget is our budget. And so we have over the years added additional screeners just because we know that that's an area that we want to continue to support, because the quicker we can catch our students when they're younger, obviously the better for the student and whatnot. So we wish we could add more. We wish we could do more, and have, more direct with some of the health centers, with all of them. So that is probably something we could do expansion, with and support.
Yeah, and I said the health center, but a lot of the areas has workers too that are out there, and they're probably. Because they deal with housing and health and all these other things, they probably, the better connection to help get some of the costs off, because if the health center is involved, then you don't have to pay that extra little bit of money, because the health centers, will cover a lot of the students that are in the schools. So,
Sure. Let me give you a little idea of what that team comprises of, so you have an idea. So usually that evaluation team that's doing a lot of that work is usually a school psychologist, which is a very high need to fill area for us right now. That is an area where, we have really struggled to retain, and also to hire. Secondly, we have usually a speech pathologist that's on that team. Occasionally, depending on the need of the student, we have occupational therapist or a physical therapist. We also have a special educator, that also sits on that team. And then, some kind of an interventionist also who's sitting on that team. So as you can tell, it's, a really diverse group that is meeting to discuss, our students and make those determinations.
Yes, Councilwoman Peterson.
Just to follow up on something you had mentioned, you said that, I was really alarmed by the amount of IEPs at the pre-K level, or the potential need for the IEP at such an early age. And then you had mentioned a number outside of the pre-K, but then you also mentioned the backlog. Can I ask how long the process takes?
Sure. So from beginning to end, so that's something we actually have been working on to really close that gap. So the bottleneck that we seem to have is where it's from the referral to the referral meeting. That seems to be our biggest area right now that we're trying to close that gap. We have made some improvements, which is why we're going to be adding some additional teams to help with. And so there have been some other areas where we struggled prior, for example, like completing the evaluation, particularly around any kind of educational or psychological, because a lot of that does require our school psychologists, and that's one of our hard to fill areas right now. So, however, we have definitely improved the amount of days, but from the beginning to the end is probably around 130-ish days, please don't quote me, but there's a lot of in between that goes into that. So it's not as clean cut, but that's usually around the number of days.
Can I follow up?
Yes, please.
So about roughly 130, that's almost an entire school year. What happens to the student in that situation?
So what we do is, one of the things is once that student becomes eligible, then we owe them compensatory services for the services that they have not received for that moment of time. And so some of that also is a lot of follow-up. So we have also offered a lot of compensatory. We've done a lot with virtual, but as you can imagine, a 3- and 4-year-old, some families have loved it and have said, this is great because I'm participating with my child. And then some families have been like, this is not for me, trying to hold my 3-year-old, trying to do these services virtually. So but we've tried to really, support families, in providing them a lot of support. We've also provided for our more severe students, like we have, ABA services to really help. And so we have a particular out-of-district site, which is Momentum in West Warwick, that has really helped and taken quite a few of and opened up classrooms just for us, for our students, with really significant needs. And so our goal is to keep tightening that, and we're getting better, and we're working really hard, and our teams are working really hard to close that, but that is an area, and just so you're aware, that's been something for a really long time in our district. And so that is something that I know that the superintendent has been, really supportive of, helping us, give us all the resources we need to really close that gap. And we might be in a better place in a couple of years. We're still seeing a really big rise, and I hate to keep talking about COVID, but we really have seen a really big rise. A lot of kids didn't get the services that they needed at that time, which has created a bigger need. So.
Last
Yes,
question,
please, no, go right ahead.
with regards to this, do you have somebody, within your staff that's handling this, managing this? Finding, I see that we have a list of, different roles and things like this. Who in your office or in administration takes?
It's a team effort, and it's really a cross team effort, like we work really closely with the chief of talent to really recruit for a staff. We also have my executive director of specialized instruction who oversees special ed for our district, including pre-K. We have a pre-K manager that also is overseeing the day-to-day operation of each of the teams. And that's pretty much the managerial piece of the teams only.
What about students that are not pre-K? Because kids do get referrals for IEPs that are post 3 and 4 years, so.
So we have RI pre-K also in the district, so that can comprise of students for general ed or students with IEPs. We also have some of our integrated classrooms where I think it's based on lottery, and so they, where we have some students with IEPs, but then also have some peers that are non-IEP. But if you're asking if we have like a universal pre-K, no.
No, I meant just in terms of the process,
Yeah.
the IEP process for students that are older, how long that takes. I understand it's
Older, like in our elementary.
elementary,
Oh,
high school.
It's definitely not, we have individual teams at each school. It's not where, it's the pre-K.
So the longest it takes is in the beginning,
Yes.
when they're first starting into the
Yes.
school. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I was concerned that you were saying 130 days for like a high school student. I
No,
was
no,
like,
no, no, totally.
That's like, okay.
And we're in full compliance with our elementary, middle, high school. It's our pre-K where it's the biggest need right now.
Okay.
I'm sorry to keep interrupting. I know you're trying to make it through, but I think it's good for us to be able to digest it and ask questions as you. So I think we're on 11. Yeah.
11, yeah, so let me, transitioning out a little bit, it's still a overview of our budget, but now looking at the revenue side. And so what you'll see here is our local budget, which is roughly 2/3 state aid, 1/3 city aid, and then a small portion that is other items such as Medicaid and indirect costs. A couple things I want to know. When you look over this past decade or so, you see roughly a 2.3% annual increase. Most of that growth has come at the state, so if you're looking at the right-hand side, about 3.3% of that annual growth has been state aid, with city aid growing a little less than 0.5% each year. And so over this time period, state aid has increased by roughly 75 million, while city aid has increased just about 5 million. So that's at the kind of macro level.
That's a good question. Oh, yes, we have a super quick question.
Yes.
Santos.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I know there's been a few settlements in that time.
Yep.
Especially within the intervention time. Are those included in these numbers?
Yeah, so if you'll see for FY 21 and FY 22, we had a settlement agreement that covered, FY 23. We had a settlement agreement that was roughly $10 million or $11 million to cover 3 years. So those were spread out in that way. A portion of it was FY 21, FY 22, none was allocated to FY 23. But the settlement agreement was an agreement, a total sum of dollars at $11 million to cover essentially 3 years. And that was reached several years ago.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilors.
Thank you. Quick question. So this just has the state and city funding and a little bit of other. Since staff are covered or FTEs are covered via like ESSER fund, where do we see federal funding or ESSER funds in the overall projections?
So that is, we'll have it in our local budget where you're, sorry, our budget book where you'll see a bigger breakdown of ESSER funds. But when we talk about our ordinances, that's strictly around our local city and state.
Please proceed.
The next one is to look at a per pupil basis, and I'll spend a little bit of time here because I think the mechanics of this are important. So it's important to note that the aid we get in from the city, the $130 million in this past year, goes to cover all students in public schools in Providence, whether that's a PTSD school or a charter school. So while there's been some decline in enrollment in PTSD, enrollment in the city of Providence has been relatively flat over the past 8 years. And so with flat student enrollment and flat funding, what that has meant is, our budget, the per pupil amount, which if you look at that blue line over time, it's been roughly a little bit under 100. So if we start with FY15 and pegging $1 to that year, roughly flat. It increases a little in 21 and 22 based on some of those settlement agreements you mentioned, but then settles in right somewhere between 100 and 105% of what was the case in FY15. When you compare that to both the consumer price index, so one measure of inflation, that gray line, as well as the city of Providence budget, that orange line, those are tracking fairly closely together. And so one way to think about it is the district receives a little bit more than $1 to pay for expenses that now cost $1.20, whether that's supplies, staff, and the issue here is the compounding factor that we see. So if there's level funding in 1 year, that's one thing, but if that's year after year, that gap between what things cost and the amount we receive just grows and grows. And so that in many ways is meant when we had to make cuts just to keep pace with basic inflation despite student need growing in ways we discussed in the prior slides. Slide 13 is a bit of a deeper dive into the Crowley Act. We recognize and understand that this is under an area of disagreement, but to us it's pretty clear. The Crowley Act identifies the amount of funds municipalities are obligated to contribute when under state control. And that is at the same level as in the prior academic year, increased by the same percentage as the state total of school aid is increased. So that's exact language from the statute. So despite that language, if you look on the right-hand side, what you'll see is the blue line is what has been allocated from the city in each of the past 2 years under the state intervention. So 130 in each of FY21, FY22, FY23, and FY24. The 133 amount in FY25. The gray line is the calculation under the statute, which is around the state total of school aid. The orange line is what has been actually provided. So you'll see the settlement agreement numbers there, and the dots are what would have been requested by PTSD in the past 2 years.
And so can I just highlight this area? You're right. I think, it certainly is an area of disagreement. I'm just going to say it because if we were to meet the gray line, it makes our pension obligation situation look like nothing. So I'm just going to say that's really quite something. But I will also say that if we were not under the control of RIDE, then we would not have to be worried about this additional aid, or would we?
Well, I mean, I would respectfully say you wouldn't be legally required to do it. I still think it would be necessary to support
To support the leadership, I understand, but we wouldn't be required.
That's accurate.
And also, I'm just going to say, and this is very large, your interpretation, Shide's interpretation, or whoever's interpretation of the gray line, it would go away. All right, thank you. I think for our committee members, it's important.
Yeah.
And our council members.
And we've recognized that, and that's why in the past few years we haven't sought, we tried to manage within our means to not. We didn't think it was responsible for the city to build that budget at that level. But we didn't do it.
Of course, you have to fight for the things right now. We understand that.
I want to be clear that, we're at 130, it was at 130 for several years now, 133. Of that $3 extra million that we received is broken down, so we know how that was broken down, where we actually only going to be seeing $300,000 out of that $3 million. And then in order for us just to close the gap that we have, That's why we was asking. I don't wanna at any point bankrupt the city. That's not, I am the city. I love the city. I don't wanna see the city go down. But at the same time, I'm here to advocate for our kids, and it's really important that we understand that 147 is where we need to be just to make it work, just to meet the day-to-day work that we do.
Understood. Thank you.
And I think it's a good segue to the last slide in this section, that's just think about, so we take away this, the Crowley Act, what we believe. And this is just comparing, contribution by other municipalities in Rhode Island. And so you just, the per pupil contribution. In the bar chart, and then the lines underneath are the percentage growth under, since fiscal year 2014. So what you can see is, all, districts, but Pawtucket and Woonsocket contribute in most cases twice as much, on a per student basis, for Providence. And then if you know, Pawtucket has, while they spend less, has seen a more significant growth. So really, it's only Woonsocket that both spends less and has seen less growth since 2014. And all right, so now let's transition from the overview of our budget to dive into some of the budget planning and budget details. So the priorities here are how we think about budgeting process, and it's always focused on a turnaround action plan, which was a document and a set of goals created by our community that highlights and provides the North Star for the district and how we operate on a day-to-day basis, and certainly how we budget. So those pillars of excellence in learning, world-class talent, engaged communities, and efficient district systems. When we think about the unique situation we're in for FY25, our goals have been to sustain those investments that we think are most important to achieving the turnaround action plan, aligning resources with the rising student needs we just discussed, increasing decision-making at the school level through student-based budgeting, and planning for long-term financial sustainability. So to talk about some highlights in each of those areas, and some of these we've already mentioned. But in excellence in learning, retaining 22 behavior interventionists to support students. That is one area that we are prioritizing for the coming year. Doubling the investment in translation and interpretation services in our local budget. Sustaining world-class talent through the $8,000 per teacher reimbursement program, as well as sustaining some really core investments we've made to assessment and learning management system platforms. So these are tools that are frankly what we kind of expect of all districts to have that we have not had for quite some time in districts. So these are common assessment systems that allow us to assess the performance of students across the board, whether you're at Alvarez or JSEC or Classical or Central, that we have a common view of what's happening across the district. So that is an area that we've made investments in the past few years that we are sustaining for the coming year. We are meeting rising needs, so we talk a lot about pre-K. Obviously, those students grow up, and so as we've added additional pre-K, we are adding 12 additional special education classrooms at the kindergarten and first grade level to accept those rising pre-kindergarten students. As Sandy had mentioned, we have increased the number of seats we've had in pre-K over the past few years, and so we will continue to sustain those, in many cases add above and beyond that, in addition to those screening and evaluation teams. And then increasing our budget for the out-of-district expenses that we've seen have grown over this past year. Where we are planning for long-term financial sustainability, reducing the district footprint for utilities and facility savings, as we mentioned before, through the accelerated closure of Gilbert Stewart. Restructuring of JSEC and 360 from two small high schools co-located within the same building to a larger, more comprehensive high school offering students all the offerings of the redesign plan for the one with Sanchez education complex. Realigning our bell times and then reducing central office FTEs as well as school-based. And we'll talk to you a little bit of each of those in greater detail. The last thing I'll mention in our planning process is we've known this year is going to be a challenging one, and so we started speaking with our school communities a lot earlier in the process. So we were actually with the council back in November to talk about our FY24 budget, but also met with our parent advisory council and district-wide advisory council to essentially, broadcast that we knew this upcoming year was going to be a challenging one. We've met consistently throughout with our school board, We had meetings with the city administration in February, March, and then over the past 2 months with our school board, have been providing more regular updates as we've been getting closer to our final funding proposal. So in this last section, this tries to summarize a lot of what is in the ordinances, and so, feel free to dive into any of those ordinances that you have questions about, and we'll have time to do that at the end if it doesn't strike you as we're going through it. But before we get into the ordinances, just to give an overview of our revenue assumptions for the coming year, you'll see on slide 20, the budget column is what was in our FY24 budget. The next column is what we are projecting for next year after we've had the March data updates, the enrollment updates that I mentioned, and then our change from one year to the next. So bundling those top lines together, and I'm happy to provide a more nuanced breakdown, but we are seeing a roughly $700K increase in funding from the state just in unrestricted aid. And some of that has to do with, while we've seen some declines in enrollment, we've also, there's an enrollment loss transition fund that the district and other districts have seen declines in enrollment over recent years. So when you take all those together, it results in a roughly $700,000 increase to the district. When we look at city aid, a small decrease of roughly $270,000 from what we requested the prior year, understanding that the prior year is also in litigation. So we are roughly flat from an unrestricted aid perspective on our local. It is important to note that the General Assembly has increased multilingual categorical funding, and the district has seen increases in that. That is, in many cases, we spend far beyond the 18 million to support our multilingual learners. I think our last year was 40 or 50 million. When you look at staff and all those other costs, so this 7 million will be used to support existing staff that we have supporting our dual language and other multilingual learner programs.
Quick clarifying question.
Please.
So in the FY24 budget for last year, you projected in at $147.9 million from the city, but you only got 130. How did you what was the budget balancing for the current fiscal year? And do you have, are we in deficit right now? Or I think we actually have a surplus, what's?
For FY24?
Yeah, for the current fiscal year, because if we budgeted that for this year, assuming you're ready to get next year, but if we budgeted it for this year we're in.
Yeah, so
What's going on?
we've not resolved, to be candid, we've not resolved 24. So I know the city's has proposed 130 million. We are, our position is still the 147. So it has not, while we haven't been receiving for this current fiscal year, that's 147 million. So that will be, that will have to be resolved through the. Slide 21, it's just a brief, y'all are familiar with this, but some of the other big things that are new to our ordinances. So, what we have before we use our three ordinances are appropriation, which is a description of funding by category. It's organized by the Uniform Chart of Accounts, which is a requirement of the state, and covers spending on local funds, which is state and city. You have a compensation ordinance that identifies all positions and salary ranges in the district regardless of funding sources. It includes all contractually agreed upon salary increases and identifies positions that were added or removed from the prior year. The classification ordinance identifies budget that we use by field and department, and that is across all funding sources, not just local, but a local and non-local budget. I'll actually skip this next slide, and because we talk a lot about it, but what we wanted to highlight here are, what we're presenting is our FY25 budget, but again, we wanted to put dollars against some of those areas that we've seen significant growth over the past few years that we are sustaining, whether that's in support of our multilingual and differently able students, because again, it is, while it's not always an increased cost for next year, it's a cost we are having to sustain from prior years. The next slide provides a brief breakdown of our appropriation ordinance, and so this is categorized in the same way that our appropriation ordinance is. And so you'll see the first two items are salaries and benefits. So that is the biggest reduction that we are projecting for this coming year, at combined roughly $17 million. That's through a reduction of school-based and central office FTEs, small increases in collectively bargained salary increases, so there are no raises slated for non-union staff, but for our unions who are all in their contract, we will be seeing a moderate increase for the coming year. And then the last thing, that MLL categorical funding shift, that is using the MLL categorical funding that we mentioned to cover existing salary expenses. On the benefit line, we're seeing predicting some decreases in state retirement and active medical, but an increase in city retirement. So taken together, that's the roughly $17 million in reductions that we are seeing for next year. The biggest areas of increase are in, again, out-of-district tuition and out-of-district transportation. Roughly $13 million, as well as tuition for public schools of choice. That's another way of categorizing charter schools. So that's the tuition increase from FY 24 to 25 for our charter schools. And then the last one is the increasing interpretation and translation services that we've been funding out with ESSER over the past few years. We've seen some small reductions in the grand scheme of things, obviously real in educational supplies and furniture and technology. So we just will be purchasing most of that for next year. And then the last point is one we're discussing, one the superintendent mentioned when we were talking about the increases that since the beginning of the intervention, the district has been receiving energy credits from the city that reduce our energy bills. We've been notified that those will be no longer provided to the district for next year. It's roughly $1 million in expenses that will have to take the district. And so the superintendent had mentioned before the $3 million, when you look at the energy credits that will now no longer be receiving, along with the increase in charter tuition of 1.7, that leaves kind of roughly $300K outside of that is staying.
I think we have a question from Councilor Annabelle.
Thank you for this summary here. Question about the utility line. Why does the district, so one, I'm really excited about the new schools that'll be more energy efficient, so I'll say that off the bat, but why does the school district not work with David Ruggiero in the energy office to negotiate lower energy prices the way the rest of all city departments do?
We do. There are cases
That's
where.
not what I understand though, that you
What's
don't. My understanding is that you actually do not work with David on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we went out, so there was one where for natural gas, we were able to get better prices by going out through a state bid rather than going with the city, so we felt that that was a better approach. We did try to work with the city on the energy credits, but
Are you part of their power options electricity pricing?
I don't believe, I will check, I'm not sure if we're part of the electricity prices, but I know the natural gas is one that we did go separately.
Because they seem to, I would just respectfully request that the district work with David. He's seen significant decreases in electricity prices for the city through the negotiation he's done through our partnership or our membership and power options. I think we buy through Constellation Energy, but it changes. He follows the energy markets really closely, and we've seen significant savings because of that. And did the city say that you couldn't use these energy credits, or like, are they totally utilizing their own energy credits now, and so there just aren't excess for the district, or? Because my understanding is these are net metering credits.
The net metering credits that had been provided to the district since 2019, that reduced our energy bills by roughly $1 million. We've been told that they won't be provided to the district for the next year.
Yeah, I think we're a little confused on that, because we have received the mixed messages. Yeah, so and we were very, very keen on reducing the utilities certainly for the schools, and I understand that we of course are going to receive the credits.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that.
I'm sorry, what is the chief reminded me of, we also were entering into an MOE, relative to our new school, our new school construction. Okay.
And know that those are some of the work that is happening, the new buildings that we, the new facilities.
Right.
You know, right now, Providence, being recognized for 2 additional green schools. Footprint. So
Yeah, congratulations, that's a big deal,
so,
yeah.
Great. I'm sorry we interrupted, please proceed.
That's a summary about appropriation and happy to answer questions here. The next slide just gives an overview of our reduction in FTE, so that's our compensation and cost of employees. So you see in total roughly 290 FTE reduction, broken down by different levels, so central office, elementary, high school, and then multi-school. Multi-school is typically, positions like social workers and others that service not just one or multiple schools. Obviously, those are kind of broad numbers, to give them into different categories, as I think people have asked. It translates to roughly 60 plus teaching positions at the elementary level. We've seen declines in art, music, and PE, or students will meet the requirements there. Oftentimes, it might mean a TS school is having a part-time art teacher instead of a full-time. As an example. Social, emotional, and behavioral staff. So I know we talked about the roles that we're maintaining, like some of the behavior interventionists and social workers. It is not the full complement that we have this year. So roughly 25 plus social, emotional, and behavioral staff. 30 plus administrative and academic support staff. Those are some of the interventionists we mentioned, as well as several of our elementary schools that are losing assistant principal for the coming year, as well as reductions in classroom and support staff, so teacher assistant and job workers. So that's a macro level. I think it's helpful just to think on the next slide is if you think of in your community, if you're looking at an elementary school or middle or high school, like what that feels like to the students and families at those schools. So if you're in an elementary school, it often means you're losing one or two, depending on the size, critical support staff members. So you might be losing an assistant principal, a guidance counselor, or one of your instructional coaches. You're often having your a specialist reduced from full-time to part-time. We are, by reducing some of our teacher assistants that support with small group instruction, we are having less of that. And then we are having fewer social emotional support. So some of our elementary schools will no longer have guidance counselors, which was one of the first investments we made in FY21. And then roles like social worker and behavior interventions will often be spread over a broader set of schools. What this feels like at a middle school or high school. We are losing a critical support staff member again, whether that's an instructional coach or guidance counselor. You may have fewer course offerings or electives due to reduction in classroom teachers. You are seeing the elimination or reduction of school-wide or community activities. So school community specialist or school culture coordinator. And similarly, we are often going to be spreading some of our social and emotional staff across a broader set of schools.
Can I just ask a question on this? I'm so sorry. So you have designated, some of your high schools for certain purposes. You call them design.
Redesign.
Redesign. And I know that has been recent and I think it certainly had some success. It's my understanding. Are those redesign programs going to be continue to be supported or? I mean, in terms of staff, so I'm just going to take this on for an example, being in art.
Arts and creations.
Yes.
Visual and performing arts.
So I just wanted, I know you had to hire staff, of course, to implement that program. Is that staff going to be retained or are there any changes in the staffing around the redesign?
Yeah, so what I will say is some of those schools do come with as based on the designation. We do receive additional federal dollars, and those are often supporting the arts integration coordinator or the career pathways at Mount Pleasant. So those positions are the same, but those schools are probably seeing reductions like any other school in their staff, but the specialized roles that were part of the redesign are being maintained.
Yeah, thank you. Second question I have is your special ed budget. I'm sorry, how much is budgeted for, is that broken out? I'm sure we had it, I just can't.
Special education, so we have special education out of district, which is the line that is the tuition. We don't get to name these unfortunately, but the line in the appropriation ordinance 55630, the tuition line, that's the out of district tuition expense. It's important that obviously we spend a lot in special education on salary, like special education teachers, teacher assistants, transportation staff, support staff. So that isn't broken out as a separate. We can pull that data through we tag expenses, but for our appropriation, it would be broken out by special education aside from the out of district placements.
And is that increasing, staying the same, decreasing, or?
Special education costs, we could look at it. I think the out of district is certainly the one that skyrocketed. I would expect some moderate increases that are, you know, as we've added like the special education option for next year, that they would go up as well.
Okay. All right, and then I also wanted to ask, I thought it was odd, the dental insurance has increased, or I think, it seems large. Why is the dental insurance 52,103 so large? Especially when we're decreasing the number of, I don't know if it's increased, because it seems to be quite large. Is that,
Is this the one that's increased by 3%, or are you looking?
I'm looking at your, I think 52,103, but yeah, it could be.
Yeah, that is one I will need to follow up with you on. I know in 22 it was about 28 million, so we had a dip in 23. If I can follow up to understand what the is there.
Okay. Question. Okay. I'm reviewing my list, so please go ahead. Councilor Vanderbilt.
I have a mix of kind of high level and specific questions. Okay. So in the, the one that looks like this, the colors.
Yep.
It looks like we've entirely defunded legal counsel except for one clerk. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so we had a in-house counsel that was originally a solicitor of the city. We sought to expand that by hiring, we've not been able to find qualified attorneys to come, so we now we will they kind of treat that entirely as outside counsel versus an in-house counsel.
Okay, what's the like cost differential between paying like do you have counsel on retainer, or do we have to pay it instead of now, or would we, that's expensive, if we just pay a solicitor a little bit more than we'd like to attract them to the position, like,
We essentially allocated the money we had in salaries to cover out this.
so it's like a one-to-one.
Yeah, so you'll see there's a line, I believe it is the recovery of attorney fees line in our appropriation ordinance that has gone up by a comparable amount. I mean, this is the first year we've done it, so I think we'll have to see. It does seem to be working so far, but I think the desire has always been to keep that work in-house. We just really struggled to find people who had the ability, the willingness, and some experience with school law. But something where I think we're open to finding the best way to do it. Like, this is working so far, but something we definitely.
Yes, please, go through your list.
We have both, in the same document, there's both a director and a chief of family and community engagement. What's the difference between the director and the chief? Do we need both?
Yeah. So one, I remember the right roles and the chief is overseeing all family engagement activities. The director is primarily working on family engagement activities and less on community engagement.
Can you describe like what those types of engagement are?
Yes, question.
Yeah, like what's the difference between family engagement? Like what are they doing? What's the engagement? Like what does it look like?
You know, there's other pieces that live, like McKinney Vento and our homeless, population and working with those families with the director. I mean, that's a big budget and a lot to manage. We also have, our parent academy, we have parent ambassadors. So that's another category. And then we have, records retention and just regular parent engagement with our staff. So, and then plus our attendance all lives in there, within that family and community engagement bucket. So
The attendance lives in there. What's the director of student attendance then?
we have a director of students.
Yeah, is that also in there? Because that was a different line item.
Yeah, so director of student attendance is in that same department.
Okay, it's in the same bucket.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah, and the other group is partnership. Sorry, I left that out.
And then just an overall maybe comment, but also question, it looks like there are a lot of positions listed as coordinators or supervisors who are now becoming executive directors. Can you talk about that switch?
Yeah, so we've undertaken a pretty significant reduction in our teaching and learning department. So in some cases, we might have had a math supervisor and a math coordinator. Now there will be one math director. So the role is slightly elevated, but it's often what was two roles is now one. I think that was done, and my colleagues can add in for a few reasons. One is I think we found roles at lower levels often attracted people who were then maybe not fully able to do some of the work that's needed with our school. So if you're a math director, you need to be able to kind of walk side by side with the principal, evaluate math teachers, have deep content knowledge in a way that a coordinator may not have. And I think that was a learning we've had over the course of the past few years. But in most of those cases, it was one or two roles, often two being collapsed into one. So there were less people and less spending, but there were a few higher.
Yeah. It looks like we lost 4 MLL instructors, but then we need the second director of MLL. Can we talk about why we would have lost instructors, but taken on a new director?
Yeah, so I don't think the director, like in section 20,
Yeah, I think so, but yeah, right.
no, yeah.
Yeah, section 20, it looks like we lost 4 MLL instructors, a certified program director and a certified program coordinator, but then there's a director of multilingual learners at 75%.
Yeah, so the director, if you look at it, that is not a change.
Oh, that's right.
It just is one, yeah, that italics means it's grant funded.
Okay.
But so we started an in-house certification program for our teachers. That was what you see with the program instructors and the program directors who were not able to sustain that for the coming year. So those positions were.
A minor, personal question is, do the bathrooms at in pre-K classrooms at MLK work yet? Because the bathrooms weren't functional for most of the year.
2 out of the 4 are functional and 2 are just about to be done.
By the end of the school year.
It should be within the next couple of weeks. I think when they were finishing just the pumps that were doing above. So those should be functional before.
A respectful request is we're adding more pre-K. They need to have bathrooms that function. These kids have been without bathrooms for like 2 years. That's a great, little kids have to go to the bathroom, so I know we're building it.
Respectfully, they have bathrooms.
They have like walk and
They're
like
just
front and the
not
back classroom.
inside of.
Yeah, they're like little, like, yeah. Okay, I have more, that's okay, unless you want to jump in.
No, you can do this, and I'll see what we can left on.
Might have more to my phone. Yeah.
What does it mean if they're in blue?
Change. That's the change.
It's a change, like the title has changed.
Yeah.
And then the green is a new position, what?
Green is a new position, red with the strike through is favorite.
At the beginning, I asked about so if the district doesn't get the additional 14 million that's proposed in the budget, what additional cuts are going to be?
Yeah, so if you look at the slide.
I feel you're right.
No, yeah.
I also want to say while you're finding it, I appreciate that you should release all that in advance.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Slide 26, so, what we obviously monitoring revenue, monitoring expenses, but when there's, what may be necessary, so, there are some statutory deadlines that we are passing, on June 1st, which is the layoff of teachers, so, that kind of restricts further, layoffs of staff, so what that would likely mean is a hiring freeze and elimination of any non-essential, non-classroom position, or filling classroom positions with substitute teachers. Further layoffs of uncertified staff members, so teacher assistants, bus monitors, other individuals that are not, that aren't statutory requirements, around layoffs. Likely the elimination of a significant amount of athletic programming, extracurricular activities, and after-school programming, and potential reductions in eligibility for bus transportation. We are this current year in a hiring and spending freeze for non-essential items. So that would likely just continue on for next year.
So some of the drop off is because we've lost the COVID money, like all the ESSER and the COVID relief money. As we look forward to like next year and the year after, are you expecting to have more significant like layoffs and decreases like we're seeing this year, or do you think it might start stabilizing, or have you done those projections?
Yeah, I mean, I think to be candid, a lot of it has to do with a few factors. Again, the big factors we saw this year were some of the increase in out of district costs being a big cost driver. expiring master plans for sure, though I think we knew those were coming in plan for it. I think a lot of it is going to come down to what the kind of city aid contribution looks like for the coming years, because that, you know, that is something that has longer term impacts beyond this year. So I suspect if we don't, you know, if we aren't able to reduce out of district costs and or SALU does not increase, this is not going to be a 1 year, difficult decisions.
Follow up on that, how can you reduce the out of district costs?
We try every day. I mean, I think some of it is, you know, one of the big limiting factors is staffing. And so one of the things as we look at it, for early childhood special education in the past 3 years, there's been only one individual in the state of Rhode Island that's graduated from a program with that certification. So that pool is not there, nor is it growing. It's all existing staff. So a lot of what we're trying to do, so staffing ends up being one of our #1 challenges beyond students coming in with severe needs that we can appropriately service. Our students on the autism spectrum that we're seeing that we just don't, it is a struggle to find teachers. So one way we do it is we build that pool ourselves, just because it doesn't exist. So our chief talent officer can talk more about it, but we're launching a grow your own program that provides teacher assistants with full support to get certified in special education and math. It's particularly great for our special education classroom because those folks are already working with our kids. They're doing a great job. We know them, and oftentimes they just need time and support to get there. So how you reduce those costs are you try to build that pool of staffing to the extent that that's one of the limiting factors. Though to be clear, it's not that it's just a 1-for-1, you save that money because you're gonna have to invest in staff costs for the district. Right. That is something
For a while, and eventually you think you might.
I don't think
We have some students that have severe needs, especially medical needs, that, you know, to replicate a program like that in the school, in the district would be cost prohibitive versus just paying the tuition for the 1 or 2 students that would need those services.
I understand. Okay. I'm sorry, we can.
And thank you so much. I do, and we've met before, but I so appreciate all the work you guys do for the kids, but, and it's our job to ask questions, so sorry for all. Yeah. Yeah. Like accept the board that happens. So one of the concerns that I've heard, so kind of 2 things. One of the concerns I've heard from my colleagues and I myself is increasing funding to the schools, when we don't have control of the schools right now, the lack of transparency or vision that we have into where the funding is going is a concern. And I know I hear from my constituents who ask like, oh, the guidance counselor at my school, or, you know, they have specific things they'd like to see. And I'm like, if we increase, I can't promise you that you're gonna get that guidance counselor, because we school lump them out. I guess one, how can we work to have greater transparency in the system, knowing you guys are still not under city control? And also, I guess the second question is, are there ways, or I assume there are ways, and this is a brief question, that like, for some of these things where reductions are necessary, like bus transportation or extracurriculars, I assume there are ways the city could support those without the funding having to go through the school district. Like we could provide services, after school services, and things like that without the funding having to flow through PPSD, but that's the question. I don't know.
Yeah.
Question, sorry.
No, that's fine. First thing I would share is that I do want to push back a bit on the transparency front in the sense that we spend a lot of our time with our school board sharing this information, and that is often the venue, and we would be more than happy to also come here in addition. All of our budget documents are online for review. So of course we can always do better, but I do think it's important that the school board is often our forum to go and present both at school board finance and school board about our contracts, about our budget each year. And we've done a lot of that over the course of this year, as well as with our parent groups and other district advisors. So always more that we can do.
Like I know for other city department budgets, our internal auditor Gina can like go in and pull information anytime she wants, which is not the case with PPSD, is my understanding.
I mean, we are under the same financial system as the city, so the city has full access to our.
Okay.
finances.
Okay, thank you. And then the other piece, is there a mechanism where like if for various reasons, like the city instead wants to fund extracurricular activities or after school programs in the schools, but the funding didn't flow through PTSD, is there a world where that's a potential possibility?
It's always it's always a possibility. It's always a possibility.
Right, can I interrupt and ask, do you run a surplus? Do you have a surplus or a reserve?
Yeah, so we have a reserve. So if you rewind to March of 2020, we shut down all our schools with COVID. We weren't running buses, we weren't using our buildings. And so in that year, we ran roughly a $10 million surplus. But again, I think it's important to remember at that time, that was way before there was even any talk of, this is, May of 2020. There was way before there was any talk of what was going to happen with, there were no stimulus dollars, the state budget wouldn't be passed for another 6 months in December of 2020. So the money was originally set aside to help us reopen, because we weren't frankly sure how we would do that without any state aid coming in and with no stimulus dollars. So that was then, stimulus dollars arrived, and that was what we were able to use to reopen. And that 10 million, that reserve fund has been used in the event that we face difficult financial times. And so we've started using that fund this FY23 to close that budget gap. I suspect we might need to use some or whole of it to close FY24 if we're still in litigation.
Okay.
And so, we took it, when the district entered into intervention, there was a collaboration agreement that specified an agreement between the administration and the district that the city would increase contributions to the district. That hasn't happened, but there was also an agreement that the district would not put any deficit on the city, right? So like, if we run a deficit, my understanding is the city is not responsible and would not cover that. And just like the city has a rainy day fund in the event that you face a deficit, we think it's financially prudent to keep up our end of the bargain.
And can I ask what it is now?
Yeah, it's roughly $12.7 million. We spent, I think, 2.3 to close FY23. So that's where it is.
Okay, thank you. Back to your list.
This was shared with me by parents, so apologies if I get a little bit of this wrong, but on the RIDE website, there's a basic education plan that requires, or it describes a basic education plan, which has a required base level of counseling support for all students in grades as well, on like social emotional issues. Given the cuts in some of the counseling, I know we touched on this a little bit, but I just want to clarify, will we meet the requirements in the basic education plan, like for kids having access to those resources, given the cuts?
Well, we're gonna have, more counselors than we've, had prior, as I shared, we're gonna still have 74. I would love to have, I'm sorry, social workers, what did I say?
Guidance counselors.
I'm sorry, thank you, social workers. So we will have, it just won't be possibly to let every building that we've had. They might have to, depending on the need, share a school, which, is not ideal for anybody. But I do think based on that number, we will. The other area that we have that still tends to be hard to fill is our psychology, school psychologists.
It'd be helpful to look at that, because for prior to the intervention, there were no guidance counselors at the elementary school, so I'm not sure there's a staffing requirement to have it. Not that, of course, it's important and necessary. But it was only since 2021 that happened. I do want to actually go back just because it reminded me, and a discussion we did have with city finances. I do think if you were looking at our fund balance, it would be 15.1 million right now. But part of that is because we drew down 2.3 million to close FY23, but there was some accounting entry that made it zeroed it out. So that's something we need to square but I just wanted to put that on the record.
Okay.
Just in case someone to look in the accounting, it would say 15 when it's in fact.
And when you say start with the finance team, our finance team, your finance team?
Our finance team with city finance working to
Okay,
align on what that is.
thank you for the clarification. And then I just wanted to, it seemed to me, I think salaries, there seems to be a disconnect between the salaries, I think going down and the fringes going up. I don't know, I wrote the note, but I can't exactly refer back to what that might refer to.
So it could be, so our employee medical is going down.
Okay,
Our state retirement, which is our teacher pension, is going down, and that tracks with FTEs as well as FICA.
Yep.
City retirement is going up, and I believe that's because we kind of just get a number, here's how much your retirement obligation is, and we. Yeah, I don't know if it actually changes the number that we usually have, but our medical, our active medical and state retirement are going down, but our city retirement is going up by $1.5 million.
okay, all right, thank you. Yes, Counselor Sanchez.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I don't have any questions, the first one, out of state, or out of district costs, the total I think is 59 million. How many millions of that is specific for charter schools?
In FY24, it was 32 million.
So my next question would be, I know Ryan can't really take a position. What is PPSD's position, if any, on charter school expansion in the city of Providence?
I mean, I would say our job is to make our schools as compelling for every student that lives in the city of Providence, and that's our job. So I mean, I really don't have a position and doesn't.
I would say that, having school choice is a good option for our families, for our Providence schools, and so students can, might be interested in the arts, and that's their passion, but they don't necessarily live next to that school, and so, I think our goal is to provide students as many options as possible, so that they choose us as their first option, and then, when we look at our CTE programs and some of our other specialized programs, they're waiting list right now, trying to get into some of our CTE programs. That's how awesome we're doing this program. So it's about making our schools more enticing to individuals, but giving them the supports that they need at the same time to make sure that they're successful at the end of the day. Not only as students, but as human beings, and physically, mentally, emotionally.
So my next question on that would be, on just a financial point of view perspective, would you guys agree or disagree that the more charter schools that open in the city of Providence, the more it's gonna hurt Providence public schools financially?
There are financial impacts when students enroll in charter and not in district, so we receive less state aid, and a portion of the state aid is that so.
So there is financial impacts when more charter schools open in the city of Providence to the Providence public school budget. Right,
Yes.
okay. And then my next question, completely off budget related, I'm just using the opportunity that you guys are here. Is there any updates on the school closure policies?
Yeah, right, Mr. Scott, probably Mr. Scott. No relation.
Second, Mr. Scott.
But it has been under discussion for our school board. I think there was a second read at the last board meeting, but there's feedback that.
Yes, so it was ready, the school closure policy requested President Rogel, and with our agreement was brought, updated, hadn't been updated since the 80s. Or 1998, it was the last time it was updated, and we, we brought the policy committee, revised it, see feedback from RIDE, see feedback from stakeholders, and it was up for second read. A couple of public commenters had some questions about it, so the president of the board referred it back to committee. So the next time the policy committee meets, we're going to open up again to look at for further public comment. Next week's policy meeting had to be rescheduled, so there won't be a meeting, but we expect to meet either July or August. And take another deeper dive into the school closure policy and just make sure it's reflective of both the current reality under state takeover and also what the world might look like when we're back in the city too. And it should probably have some feedback from the city council as well for the post takeover What would it look like posted building?
So sorry, Jim, is there, no,
Please.
so is there a draft right now that's out there?
I'll email it to you once the meeting's over.
To all of the council members, if you kindly could.
I think you find it, yeah, you'll do it, it's on our public school website.
It's, there's a draft version of this website, so I'll send you the digital versions available.
Thank you, and I do have one more question, so I know there was like the round of. I don't think layoffs is non-renewals, the 60 that the school board voted against, I don't know, if that's proper terminology. What's like the next step after that?
Yeah.
So we're in the process of, some letter went. And I also sent a letter to the commissioner saying that, you know, what damage this is going to do to the district if we do not address it immediately. So I am requesting for it to be overturned by the commissioner and I'm asking for support because this is going to hurt the district. An additional 50, I think it was 51 additional non-renewals, non-tenure, and it's what is it, 4
I mean, so with the vote, it essentially provided $4.5 million of unfunded expenses for the coming year beyond what this is, so. It was a surprise, I mean, in most districts, it's a non-renewal fiscal exigency, which are oftentimes difficult decisions, but aren't really subject to debate, but they voted to not take the superintendent.
And I believe, and it's not the first time that we've had conversations in reference to the deficit that we're in and where this is going, what damage this is going to do to the district. Because if we don't have the money, how do we pay someone to that at the in place? So this is beside myself. I don't know the reason why they chose that way, but we're facing it.
No, I just want to thank you guys for coming here. I know there's sometimes tensions or differences, but I can speak at least for myself that I want to be as collaborative and supportive as much as possible, and I really appreciate that time tonight.
Yes, Counselor.
Yes. I promise. And I think it's more for this listener, but first I also want to echo Counselor Sanchez's comments. I'm a public school grad myself, and I'm just really grateful for all you do and for being here so late. And we're here having snacks and like we should have brought you some snacks. But the question I have is might be more for the solicitor, and I'm curious, but I don't know the answer to this. And so maybe it's a follow-up as well. But where in statute does it require that all the funding follow the student? So the student chooses a charter over PPSD. How do we,
That will unfortunately be a follow-up.
Thank you, okay. Yeah, I think it's the statute, but thank you.
This is with respect to the state aid for students.
Yeah. The
That-
state aid and the city aid, has to follow the student when they go to the outside, because it's like $36 million. I'm like, well, that's good. Yeah.
So, yes, Counselor Peterson.
Sorry, I hope that mine will be brief. The positions in green on this beautiful handout that you guys gave us. Is there somebody doing this work in some capacity currently? I know that these are new positions, but is there somebody currently doing either a piece of this work or something similar?
Yeah, so it'll probably depend role to role, but let me give you an example of what's often happening, so.
And I'm specifically looking at like the director of PE and health, the director of PK through 12 literacy, PK through 12 math, science and STEM, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so for, like the director, let me go through now. Oftentimes right now we have a supervisor of math, and a coordinator of math, 2 individuals working on that. We now have 1 higher level director of math, a certified administrator,
The current folks that are in the positions prior to the change, they stay in the positions to the end of the school year,
Okay.
and these newer positions start July.
Okay, and are you hiring out for these, or are they just moving up to directorship?
It depends.
Okay.
The process goes that the positions are posted and people apply for the job.
Okay,
All folks would have to be applying.
okay, all right. My next question is with regards to attendance. I know that there was a big push. There was a whole marketing and obviously an initiative done to advocate for better attendance, and I just wanted to follow up and see how it's going.
So. We're on track to meeting. That's what we're trying to do. I know there has been some pushback because of, graduations on works. So I had to make a decision, make sure that graduations are happening towards the end of the year when the school's finishing. Because, if we are to make our TAP goal and then achieve the goal, then, we have to make sure that the students are in school, and I've known from past history, from almost 30 years in the district. If I graduate today, that means I'm the rest of the week. So we have to, or even if it's just a move up celebration, they feel like I already moved up and they don't have to. So we want to make sure that we have the students in school all the way to the last day of school.
Yeah.
To make sure that we meet those goals.
Great, thank you. I just as a point of observation, work in a private school, chronic absenteeism is also a private school issue. It's just everywhere. It's just a little bit of a change of pace from what we saw pre-COVID. It's become much more of a normalized thing, and so I do applaud your efforts and keenly watching to see what I can utilize in my own institution. So thank you.
Thank
But-
you for saying that, and,
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's difficult. So I appreciate the things that you're doing. My last question is just with regards to Newcomer Academy. And I wanted to just follow up and understand what was happening there and what the school department is doing to either move this along or prioritize what the issues were that were laid out.
Sure, so the Newcomer Academy was a very new program for us this year, which was exciting, but also comes with some challenges as you're trying to start up a brand new program. And so currently, right now, at the district level, we are assessing what have been some of the successes, what are those things that have been going really, really well, and then what are some of those things that have been challenges, and how we can support the school and rectify those challenges. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Yeah, please.
Conceptually, want to make sure we're on the same page for when we were looking at our newcomer students that are coming into the district 17 and up. Their rate of dropout was significantly higher.
And attendance.
Their attendance, but dropping out was a significant issue. And often these same students are working while they're trying to attend school. They're working in minimum wage jobs. So the goal of this program is really to try to find a way where students could get the academic needs met, as well as get CTE certification, which can put them into higher paying jobs and, really boost the city as well. So that was the goal, for this program, and I just want to set the stage for really what we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you. Earlier in the year, I had put forward a resolution because I was in such support of the work that was being done over at the Newcomer Academy. I believe strongly in meeting kids where they're at and students where they're at. And what I saw with my own eyes was an opportunity for that, especially with our students that are coming to American schools for the first time. I felt that this was a huge initiative. And to be able to have classes at all hours of the day, on Saturdays, partially at one time, and then again later during the day to fit their needs because of how important it is to actually work as well. I really was impressed with the support that the students were getting, and I would like to make sure that this opportunity for our students continues and thrives. So I just wanted to know because of the ongoing conversations that have been happening lately. So I do want to reiterate and my support on Newcomer Academy.
Thank you for sharing that. We appreciate that.
And I would just like to ask one last question. Who is in charge of your utilities?
I mean, it runs through our financing, but in terms of, like I said, we don't have someone who's directly focused as a sustainability.
Okay, I'm gonna make one request that we do have someone from your office contact David Ruggiero.
Okay.
And just because I think, the communication would be very beneficial, I really would appreciate it. And the second thing I'm gonna say is I'm gonna reiterate, my colleagues who have thanked you, thanking you so much for coming this evening to present. I was thinking we certainly didn't have the presentation during our budget season last year. And I'm not sure since the takeover that we've had this kind of opportunity to work on the budget together, at least listen to your presentation, ask the detailed questions, get a true understanding of where we are. And so I have to thank you very, very much for being collaborative and coming today, because we just haven't had this opportunity. And the value of it is huge, I mean, and so I'm very grateful for you presenting, and I think it was an excellent presentation, and thank you all counselors for your excellent questions. All right, thank you, and that I think we're.
Motion to
Motion to continue at 104, please.
Yes.
I call back that motion.
You ends 104.
So, great.
All right, motion made by Counselor Rambo, seconded by Counselor Sanchez, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
You have to go to prom.